Welcome to Relative Our Family Mess. This is a dedicated space where we explore the deeper dimensions of life, focusing on true strength, timeless resilience, and the compelling stories that shape a man's journey. If you appreciate substantive, impactful content and refined perspectives, you are in the right place. Without further ado, I welcome you to today's new video. I brought my old depth finder to a repair shop on the harbor because the display had been flickering for 3 weeks. But when my buddy Sal cracked open the casing, he did not find a loose wire. He found a micro SD card sealed in waterproof adhesive, hidden inside the housing like someone never wanted it found. When I plugged it into his laptop, I saw my own signature on a contract I had never signed, selling my boat to a company I had never heard of. And then I opened the emails. The woman I had slept beside for 35 years had already found a buyer for everything I owned, including my mind. It means more than you know that you chose to stay. Tell me in the comments what city or country you are joining from today. Let us see how far this story travels. Certain details in this story are fictional, shaped for telling and reflection, but what this story carries, I hope, is something that stays with you. The depth finder had been flickering since September. I noticed it the way I notice most things on the lucky penny, quietly, without urgency. The way you log a minor instrument fault and keep running because the sea does not wait for your maintenance schedule. 22 years I had owned that boat. A flickering display was nothing. Something to fix when the weather turned. Carolyn was at the kitchen counter that Tuesday morning, pouring coffee into the 2 mugs we had used every day for longer than I cared to count. You should get that depth finder looked at before it dies completely. I will get to it. You said that 2 weeks ago. She set my mug down and paused. Bobby, have you noticed you have been a little scattered lately, forgetting things? I looked up from the newspaper. Like what? Little things. You left the truck keys in the front door last Thursday. You told Ed the same story twice on Saturday. She smiled. Warm. Concerned. I just think maybe you should mention it to Dr. Marsh. Just a checkup. I'm fine. Carolyn, I know you are. I just worry. She kissed the top of my head and carried her coffee to the living room. I sat at the kitchen table and did not think about what she had said, because at that point I had no reason to. 40 years reading the Atlantic, reading weather systems, reading sonar returns and the faces of men who worked dangerous water. If my mind was slipping, I would have been the first to know. I thought about Marcus instead. My son had not called in 6 weeks. Not unusual for a 29-year-old working the docks at Gloucester Harbor, living 8 miles away and managing to feel like he lived in another state. We had not argued exactly. We had just stopped finding reasons to talk, the way a current pulls 2 boats apart so slowly that neither captain notices until the distance is already there. Then I thought about the depth finder, and I thought if I got it fixed, I could take my grandson Tyler out fishing on Saturday. That was simple and warm, and enough to get me out of the chair. Carolyn left for yoga at 9:30. I heard the garage door, heard her car, heard the house settle into its mid-morning quiet. The clock in the hallway, the refrigerator humming, gulls arguing somewhere on the waterfront. I pulled the depth finder from the mudroom shelf, wrapped it in a shop towel, and drove to Rogers Street. Sal Medeiros had run Medeiros Marine Electronics out of a narrow brick storefront on the harbor for 24 years. The shop sat between a bait supplier and a chandlery, and it smelled the way it always smelled. Solder and salt, and the warmth of old electronics. I had known Sal for 30 years. He had rewired the Lucky Penny's navigation panel twice, and once Drove 40 minutes in a January ice storm to bring me a replacement fuse. He was not a man who performed friendship. He simply was one, steady and present. Like a well-built dock, he was at the workbench when I came in, soldering something small. And he looked up with the unhurried expression of a man who has never rushed a repair in his life. "Bobby. Morning. Sal. Depth finder is acting up. Screen flickers, goes dark, comes back." He took the unit, turned it over, pressed the housing seams with his thumbs. Could be the backlight inverter. Could be a ribbon cable. He set it on the bench. Give me until 3. I drove home. I sat in my chair with the newspaper and coffee that went cold. And I waited for 3 o'clock, the way you wait for anything ordinary, without expectation, without the slightest sense that 3 o'clock was going to be the hinge on which my entire life turned. My phone rang at 2:47. I looked at the screen. Sal Medeiros. Bobby. His voice was different. Flat in a way that had nothing to do with his usual economy of words. I had heard that tone before, a long time ago, in the voice of a Coast Guard officer telling me a boat had gone down off Thatcher Island. "I need you to come back to the shop. Everything okay with the depth finder?" A pause. Short. But I felt it the way you feel a sudden drop in barometric pressure. Not in your ears, but somewhere deeper. "Just come. Come now." Another pause. "And do not bring your wife." I drove back to Rogers Street with both hands on the wheel and the windows up and the radio off. The October afternoon had gone gray the way October does in Gloucester, the light flattening out over the harbor, the water turning the color of old steel. I parked in the same spot I had used that morning and sat for a moment with the engine running, looking at the front of Sal's shop through the windshield. The closed sign was already up. Sal opened the side door before I knocked. He did not greet me. He turned and walked back through the narrow corridor that smelled of solder and marine varnish, past shelves of capacitors and coiled wire, into the back workroom where he did his serious repairs. I followed him without a word. The depth finder was on the workbench under the magnifying lamp, its housing removed, the internal components laid out on a clean sheet of brown paper. Sal had set them in order, the way he always did, methodical and precise. But beside the circuit board and the ribbon cable and the backlight assembly, there was something else. A micro SD card, matte black, no bigger than a thumbnail. It had been sealed to the inside of the housing with a bead of waterproof marine adhesive, the kind you use on hull fittings below the waterline. Someone had placed it there deliberately, with care, and with the clear intention that it would not be found during ordinary use. That was glued to the inside of the lower casing. Sal said. His arms were crossed. His jaw was tight. Waterproof adhesive. Factory spec for below waterline bonding. Whoever put it there knew exactly what they were doing. I looked at the card. I looked at Sal. "Have you opened it?" He nodded once, reached behind the bench and pulled his laptop forward. It was already on. The screen showing a file directory. 3 folders. He turned the screen toward me and stepped back. I sat on the metal stool beside the workbench. The lamp was warm on my hands. The shop was quiet except for the wind picking up outside, rattling the sign above the front door, the way it always did when the weather came in off the Atlantic. The first folder contained a scanned document, a contract of sale for a commercial fishing vessel, registered as the Lucky Penny. Hull number and registration matching mine exactly. The buyer was listed as Compass Point Holdings, a name I had never seen. The sale price was $380,000. At the bottom of the page was my signature, or something that looked enough like my signature to pass a glance. But I had not signed it. I had never seen this document before this moment. The second folder contained emails, 14 of them, spanning 4 months, June through September. The sender addresses were masked behind a generic domain, but the names were not masked at all. Carolyn Hale, Dennis Wakefield. I did not know anyone named Dennis Wakefield. I read them in order. The early ones were logistical, dry, businesslike, transfer timelines, account routing, filing deadlines. But the later ones changed tone. September 11th. Dennis to Carolyn. How is the medical piece coming along? Carolyn to Dennis. Same day. Doctor. Marsh is cooperating. 2 more months of documentation and we file. Dennis to Carolyn. September 19th. Once Bobby gets the diagnosis, we close everything within 30 days. Boat, house, accounts. All of it. I read that line 3 times. Once Bobby gets the diagnosis. The third folder contained a single document. A draft petition for appointment of guardian. Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Probate court. The respondent was Robert James Hale. The petition described progressive cognitive deterioration, impaired judgment, and inability to manage personal and financial affairs. 3 careful paragraphs written by someone who had thought hard about what a judge would find convincing. 2 lines remained blank. 1 required a physician's signature. 1 required a filing date. I sat on that stool for a long time. The lamp buzzed faintly. The wind pushed against the shop windows. Sal stood to my left, arms still crossed, looking at the far wall, giving me what privacy a man can give another man in a 10 by 12 room. "Bobby!" His voice had dropped low. "You need to call the police. Right now. Do not go home tonight." I looked at the emails. I looked at the contract with my signature that was not my signature. I looked at the petition that described a man I did not recognize as myself. And I thought about what a single phone call would produce at this moment. Carolyn would say the emails were taken out of context. She would say the contract was a misunderstanding. She would say the petition was a precaution, a loving wife preparing for an uncertain future. And she would say it calmly, with the steady warmth of a woman who had spent considerable time preparing for exactly this conversation. I had a memory card and some documents. I needed more than that. "Not yet," I said. My voice came out steady, which surprised me. "Not yet. Sal," he looked at me then. Really looked. "You understand what those emails say?" "I understand exactly what they say." "Then what are you waiting for?" I looked at the depth finder on the bench, its housing open, its secret exposed under the yellow light of the magnifying lamp. 22 years I had trusted that instrument to tell me where the bottom was. And all that time, someone had hidden something inside it that was designed to put me there. "I am waiting," I said, "until she has nowhere left to sail." Sal was quiet for a moment. Then he pulled a USB drive from beside the laptop. I copied everything. Full resolution. Time stamped. He pushed it across the bench. "Whatever you are planning, you are going to need this." I put the drive in my jacket pocket. I looked at the memory card one last time. Then I stood up and buttoned my coat. "Put the depth finder back together," I said. "Make it look like nothing happened." Sal nodded slowly. "You are a cooler man than I am. Bobby Hale. I am a patient man," I said. "There is a difference." She was already asleep when I got home. Or she was pretending to be. After 35 years, I still could not always tell the difference. And that thought, which once would have seemed unremarkable, now carried a weight I was not prepared for. I undressed in the dark, moved to my side of the bed, lay on top of the covers for a moment before pulling them back and getting underneath. The mattress shifted with my weight. Carolyn did not move. Her breathing was slow and even, the rhythm I had fallen asleep beside for 3.5 decades. Through the open window, the sound of the harbor at night, water against the pilings, the low clang of a channel marker somewhere beyond the breakwater, the tide coming in the way it always came in, steady and indifferent. I looked at the ceiling. The street light outside pushed a thin amber line through the gap in the curtains. I tracked it with my eyes, and I did not think about how I felt. I thought about what I knew. Item 1. There was a micro SD card hidden inside the depth finder on my boat, sealed with waterproof marine adhesive. That card contained documents describing the transfer of my property, the forgery of my signature, and the legal framework for declaring me mentally incompetent. This was not impulsive. This was engineered. Item 2. The email spanned 4 months. 14 exchanges between Carolyn and a man named Dennis Wakefield. Each one more specific than the last. The phrase that kept returning to me like a rogue wave, rolling through everything else. Once Bobby gets the diagnosis, we close everything within 30 days. Item 3. The guardianship petition was 80% complete. It needed 2 things: a physician's signature and a filing date, which meant someone had already been approached, or was about to be. My father had been a lobsterman out of Rockport for 41 years. He was not a man who gave advice freely, but the things he said tended to stay. One of them had stayed with me since I was 14, standing beside him on the stern of his boat in a flat calm that felt wrong. Still water hides the deepest current. Bobby, the ocean that looks safest is the one most likely to pull you under. I had lived inside still water for 35 years, and I had not felt the current until a broken depth finder dragged it to the surface. I thought about Marcus, asleep 8 miles away, who knew nothing. I thought about Jess in Portland, who knew nothing. I thought about what a grieving widow looks like to the people around her, and I thought about how well Carolyn understood the people around her. And I thought about the phrase once Bobby gets the diagnosis, and I counted backward from the filing deadline and arrived at a number that made the room feel smaller. I could not afford anger. Anger requires safety, and I wasn't safe. I was lying in my own bed, in my own house next to the person who had written the plan, listening to her breathe. The thing to do was think like a captain, read the chart, plot every reef and shoal, find the channel that leads to open water, then run it without touching the sides. I needed 3 things. Physical evidence. I had it. Financial proof. I did not have it yet. Medical proof that my mind was exactly as sharp as it had always been, that the cognitive decline narrative was fiction. I did not have that either. All 3 had to exist simultaneously, and all 3 had to be unassailable. 1 layer was a story. 2 layers was a dispute. 3 layers was a case no one could steer away from. I closed my eyes. I listened to Carolyn breathe, and I started charting a course. I left the house at 5:40 the next morning. Carolyn was still upstairs. I drove to Rogers Street, parked by the side door. Sal was already there, coffee in hand, apron on. The USB drive sat on the bench in a small envelope. He handed it to me without a word. "Depth finder is back together," he said. "Runs clean. Screen is fixed. Looks like nothing happened to it. That is exactly what it needs to look like." I drove to the harbor, walked down the dock, and placed the depth finder back in its mount on the Lucky Penny's wheelhouse console. I powered it on. The screen glowed steady. No flicker. I locked the wheelhouse and walked back up the dock to the truck. From my study window, 20 minutes later, I saw her, Carolyn, crossing the backyard in her gray fleece, walking down the path to the dock with purpose in her step. She climbed aboard the Lucky Penny, stepped into the wheelhouse, and stood there for perhaps 15 seconds. I could not see exactly what she was looking at. I did not need to. She stepped back out, climbed onto the dock, and walked back up the path to the house without looking around, without hurry, with the specific posture of a person who has confirmed that something is exactly where it should be. She just checked on it. She does not know it has already been copied. I went downstairs. I filled the kettle. I set it on the burner and pulled 2 mugs from the cabinet. By the time the water boiled, I had the coffee measured and the newspaper open on the table. She came through the back door 5 minutes later, cheeks pink from the October air. "You are up early," she said. "Could not sleep. Coffee is ready." She smiled and poured herself a cup, and neither of us said anything else, and the morning continued exactly as it always did. I left the house at 5:50 the next morning. Carolyn was still upstairs. I dressed in the dark, took my jacket from the hook by the back door, and drove 3 blocks down Atlantic Road to where the street curved toward the harbor and the houses thinned out. The October sky was still charcoal. The water beyond the rooftops was invisible, but I could smell it. Salt and cold, and the particular rawness of an ocean that has not yet decided what kind of day it intends to be. I sat in the truck without starting the engine and pulled out my phone. Helen Garza had been a maritime insurance attorney 6 years ago when a claim on the Lucky Penny's hull damage went sideways. A surveyor had filed a fraudulent assessment. An insurance company had denied coverage based on that assessment, and I had been left with a $30,000 repair bill and no recourse. Helen had found the discrepancy in the surveyor's report in under 20 pages of reading, something 2 other attorneys had missed entirely. We worked together for 5 weeks. I left with a clear impression that she thought in systems the same way I did. Not feelings first. Structure first. Find where the hull is compromised, then patch it from the inside out. I found her number and pressed call. She picked up on the 3rd ring. "Garza, Helen, it is Bobby Hale. I do not know if you remember." "I remember. The Lucky Penny. Hull survey dispute. 2019. No pause. No warmth. No performance of surprise. Just the flat efficiency of someone who filed things properly and kept them filed. What has happened?" I gave her 3 minutes. No editorializing. Just the sequence. The depth finder. Sal. The memory card. The contract. The emails. The guardianship petition. I heard her pen on paper while I talked. When I finished, she was quiet for exactly 5 seconds. "All right," she said. "Here is what you don't do. You don't confront her. You don't change your behavior in any way she could notice. You don't move money, close accounts, or make any financial changes. Any of those things could be used against you later." A pause. "Can you do that?" "Yes. Your son, Marcus. He works at the harbor." "He does." She wrote something down. I heard the pen scratch twice. She did not explain why she had asked. Come to my office today. 2:00. Come alone. Do not tell Carolyn where you are going. Understood. Bobby. Her voice shifted, not softer, but more direct. You did the right thing waiting. Most people do not. I looked through the windshield at the empty street. A single light had come on in a house 2 doors down. The harbor was showing itself as a pale gray line between the rooftops. I will be there at 2, I said. Her office was on the 3rd floor of a brick building on Main Street, 4 blocks from the waterfront. Clean, angular. No decoration except a framed nautical chart of Cape Ann on the wall behind her desk. She was already inside when I arrived, a yellow legal pad in front of her, and a cup of black coffee she had clearly not touched. She stood, shook my hand once, and sat back down before I had fully settled into my chair. Walk me through it again, slower this time. I laid out everything. The memory card, the contract, the emails, the guardianship petition. I had brought the USB drive. She plugged it into her laptop without being asked, studied the documents in silence, read the emails twice, and wrote steadily on the legal pad throughout. When I finished, she set her pen down. 3 layers, she said. Physical evidence. You have it. Financial proof. We need bank records and documentation of the forged signature. Medical. We need an independent cognitive evaluation from a physician with no connection to your family. She drew 3 columns on the legal pad. All 3 have to be ready at the same time. 1 layer is anecdotal. 2 is a dispute. 3 is a case. She looked up at me. Exactly, I said. There is 1 more piece. This Dennis Wakefield. The emails suggest a financial relationship. Possibly more. If money has moved between accounts, we need to trace it before anyone has a chance to relocate it. She tapped the legal pad. What do I do in the meantime? You go home, Helen said flatly. You make dinner. You watch television. You act like a man who has absolutely no idea that anything is wrong. She picked up her coffee, looked at it, put it back down. How long can you do that? I thought about the amber line on the ceiling, about Carolyn's breathing in the dark, about the morning coffee and the newspaper and 35 years of ordinary life. As long as I need to, I said. That evening, Carolyn went to a neighbor's dinner party. I told her I was tired, that my back was acting up, that I would stay home with a book. She kissed my cheek at the door and left at 6:30. I went upstairs. Her vanity drawer was closed but not locked. I opened it slowly, knowing what I was looking for only because the guardianship petition on the memory card had been a draft. A draft implies a final version somewhere closer to hand. I found it in a navy blue folder beneath a stack of magazines. A printed guardianship petition, identical to the digital draft, but further along, 80% complete. My date of birth, our address. Marcus and Jess listed as interested parties. 3 paragraphs describing progressive cognitive deterioration, impaired judgment, inability to manage personal and financial affairs. 2 blank lines remained. 1 for a physician's signature. 1 for a filing date. Clipped inside the front cover was a business card. Tom Weaver, Esquire, Family Law. On the back, in Carolyn's handwriting, 2 words. Ready soon. I put the folder back exactly as I had found it. I went downstairs and sat in the living room with a book I did not read. When Carolyn came home at 9:15, I was in the kitchen making tea. You look tired, Bobby. You are working too hard on that boat. Probably right, I said. She smiled and went upstairs. I stood at the counter and listened to her footsteps above me, the familiar creak of the bedroom floor, the sound of drawers opening and closing. And I thought about 2 blank lines on a form that was designed to erase me from my own life. It started at dinner, a Sunday evening, 2 weeks after I sat on Sal's metal stool and read 14 emails that rearranged my understanding of the woman sitting across from me. Marcus had come over. Not because I had asked, and not because he had called ahead. Carolyn had invited him. She mentioned it casually that afternoon while slicing tomatoes at the counter. Marcus is coming for dinner. I thought it would be nice. We have not seen him in a while. She was right about that. 6 weeks since his last visit. But the way she said it carried something underneath. A warmth that was aimed not at me, but at an audience. The careful tone of a woman setting a stage. Marcus arrived at 6. He came through the back door the way he always did. Boots heavy on the porch steps. Jacket smelling of diesel and salt water from the docks. He nodded at me. "Dad," hugged Carolyn, took his usual seat at the table, and said almost nothing while she served the pot roast and filled the silence with the kind of light conversation that kept the room moving without requiring anyone to steer. The first remark came between the salad and the main course. "Bobby, did you remember to lock up the lucky penny last week, Marcus? Your father left the wheelhouse unlocked Tuesday night. I noticed it Wednesday morning when I walked down to check. I had not left the wheelhouse unlocked. I locked it every time I stepped off that boat, the same sequence I had followed for 22 years. Key, deadbolt, handle check. The same way I secured the wheelhouse before every departure for 4 decades of commercial fishing. Muscle memory does not forget. Must have slipped my mind," I said, and cut my pot roast. Marcus looked at me, not with suspicion exactly, but with something worse. Concern. The particular concern of a son who has been told quietly, in conversations he was not meant to repeat, that his father is not quite what he used to be. "You okay, Dad?" "Fine. Good pot roast." The second remark came over dessert. "I was telling Dr. Marsh that your father has been having trouble sleeping," Carolyn said, spooning ice cream into bowls. "He suggested maybe a supplement might help. Something gentle." She said it to Marcus, not to me. A report delivered to a witness. "That is thoughtful," Marcus said. And he looked at me again with that same careful expression. The expression of a young man recalibrating his understanding of his father based on information he had no reason to doubt. I ate my ice cream. I complimented the pot roast a second time. I helped clear the table and walked Marcus to his truck in the driveway. And when he hugged me goodbye, he held on a half-second longer than usual. The way you hold someone you are worried about. I watched his taillights disappear down Atlantic Road. Then I went to my study, closed the door, and wrote everything down. Date, time, exact words, context, Carolyn's remark about the wheelhouse, the supplement comment aimed at Marcus, his expression, the held hug. I logged it in a notebook I kept in the locked drawer of my desk, each entry time-stamped on my phone as backup. She was building a version of me, forgetful, declining, a man who needed managing. She was building it one dinner at a time, one remark at a time, one concerned glance directed at the people around me. So I was building a different record, one she did not know existed. The next morning, Monday. Carolyn left for yoga at 9:30. I waited until her car disappeared down the street, then drove to Cape Ann Savings Bank on Main Street. The branch was quiet, a teller counting bills near the window, an older couple reviewing paperwork at a desk in the corner, the low hum of fluorescent lights overhead. I did not go to a teller. I went to the reception desk and said I needed to speak with someone in fraud prevention. Not customer service. Fraud prevention specifically. The receptionist gave me a look that was professionally neutral and asked me to wait. Nina Tran came out 4 minutes later. She was 41, composed, unhurried, with the manner of someone who had heard most things before and found very few of them surprising. She shook my hand, introduced herself as a fraud prevention specialist, and showed me to a small private office off the main floor. "What can I help you with?" "Mr. Hale, I have a joint account here with my wife. I have reason to believe there have been unauthorized transactions. I would like to review the activity for the past 12 months. She typed without looking at the keyboard. "Can I ask what specifically concerns you? I believe my signature may have been forged on an authorization document." She stopped typing, looked at me directly for the first time. "All right," she said, and her voice had shifted, still professional, but with a new quality of attention. "I'm going to need you to come back Wednesday. Bring valid identification and any original signed documents from before this year, something we can use as a baseline comparison." She paused. "Wednesday at 2. I will be here." She walked me to the lobby. I was out the door at 10:43. Carolyn's yoga ended at 11. I drove home, parked in the garage, and was sitting in my chair with the newspaper when I heard her car in the driveway 17 minutes later. "How was class?" I called from the living room. "Good. Instructor tried a new sequence. My shoulders are going to hate me tomorrow. There is coffee if you want it." "You are a good man, Bobby Hale," she said it lightly. "The way you say something you have said 100 times before." Moving through the kitchen without stopping, I looked at the newspaper in my hands and said nothing. I listened to the cabinet open, the pour of coffee into a mug, the ordinary music of a Monday morning. Nina Tran had the records ready when I arrived Wednesday at 2 o'clock. The private office felt smaller in the afternoon, the light coming in flat through half-open blinds. She had 2 documents on the desk, each in a clear protective sleeve, and she had turned her monitor so I could see the screen from my side. "I want to show you something," she said, pulling up 2 images side by side. "This is your signature from the original joint account agreement in 2018. She pointed to the left image. "And this is the signature on a financial transfer authorization filed in July of this year." Bottom. I looked at both of them. They were close. Someone had put real effort into the reproduction. The general shape was right. The loop on the rom, the way the H dropped slightly below the baseline. But I had signed my name roughly 40,000 times in my life. I knew my own hand the way I knew the wheel of my boat, by feel, by angle, by the specific pressure of decades of repetition. "The downstroke on every letter angles right," Nina said, tracing it with her pen without touching the sleeve. "Consistent deviation throughout, approximately 3 degrees. That is characteristic of someone copying from a model rather than signing naturally." She looked up at me. "Mr. Hale, in my professional opinion, this signature was not written by the same person." The words landed in the room like an anchor hitting bottom. "How much has moved?" I asked. My voice was steady. Nina pulled up a transaction summary on her screen. 3 transfers over 3 months, July through September, each one under $90,000. She turned the screen toward me. I looked at the total. $380,000. Transferred to an account held by Compass Point Holdings. "Why under 90,000? I asked, though I already knew. "Federal reporting thresholds," she said carefully. "Structuring transactions to stay below those thresholds is itself a federal offense, regardless of where the money originated. Where did it go? A corporate account. We are still identifying the beneficial owner." She held my gaze. "Mr. Hale, I need you to come back Friday. There are additional steps, and I want our compliance officer present. I will be here. I called Helen from the parking lot. She picked up on the second ring. I read her the numbers from memory. 380,000. 3 transfers, July through September. Each one structured under the reporting threshold. The signature on the transfer authorization is a forgery, I said. Nina confirmed it. Consistent 3-degree deviation. Practiced copy. Helen was quiet for 3 seconds. Forgery on a financial authorization is a felony, she said. Combined with the structuring charges, this is no longer a civil matter. A pause. This is good. Bobby, this is layer 2 taking shape. What about the account Compass Point Holdings Bullmatting? I am already looking into it. Corporate shell. Registered in Delaware 6 months ago. We will find who is behind it. She paused again. I'm going to contact Nina directly. We need a soft freeze on your joint account. Not a full block. Carolyn needs to be able to attempt another transaction. We want to catch her in motion. What does a soft freeze do? Any transaction over 5,000 gets flagged and held for 48 hours. Nina notifies us before the money moves. Carolyn sees no change from her end. Do it. Go home, act normal. That evening, after Carolyn went to bed, I sat in my study with the door closed and went further back. Helen had asked me to pull every financial record I could access, going back 3 years. Look for patterns, she had said. Anything that does not fit. I found it at 11:22. A wire transfer dated March 14th, 2023. $50,000 into a personal savings account Carolyn maintained separately. One I had always known about. One I had never questioned, because we had always kept some finances independent. The sender was listed as D. Wakefield, Dennis Wakefield. The name from the emails. I sat back. I opened the shared calendar archive on my laptop, the one Carolyn and I had used for years to coordinate appointments. June 2023. There it was. A note in her handwriting in the physical planner I found in the desk drawer. Discuss estate planning with Bobby. Approach gently. I remembered that evening. I remembered it, with a clarity that felt like standing in cold water. A Sunday in late June, the air warm and smelling of cut grass, and the harbor beyond the backyard. We had been sitting on the back porch, the way we did most summer evenings, watching the light change over the water. Carolyn had said, very gently, that she had been thinking about getting their affairs in order. Just practical, she had said. At their age, she wanted to make sure they were taking care of each other. I had thought it was love. I had squeezed her hand on that porch and told her it sounded like a good idea. And she had smiled at me. And the harbor had gone gold in the last of the light. And I had believed completely that I was sitting beside a woman who loved me and was thinking about our future. March 2023. $60,000 from Dennis Wakefield. 3 months later, a conversation on the porch designed to look like tenderness. That memory now had a different shape entirely. I closed the laptop. I turned off the desk lamp. I sat in the dark for a long time, listening to the house settle and the harbor breathe beyond the window. Feel it later, I told myself. Right now. Write it down. I picked up my pen and wrote the date, the amount, and the name. And I drew a line connecting March to June. And I kept working. Ed Barros came to the dock on a Friday afternoon, carrying a tackle box he did not need, and wearing the expression of a man who had driven over with a purpose he had not yet figured out how to say aloud. I was on the lucky penny, replacing a frayed dock line on the port side bow cleat, when I saw him walking down the pier. Ed was 65, broad through the shoulders, with a face that had been weathered by the same Atlantic wind that had weathered mine. We had been neighbors for 15 years, and fishing partners for most of them. He was not a man who dropped by without reason, and he was not a man who carried a tackle box to a dock in late October when every sensible fisherman in Gloucester had already winterized his gear. He set the box down on the pier beside my stern line and stood there for a moment, hands in his jacket pockets, looking out at the harbor the way men look at water when they are organizing their thoughts. "You got a minute?" he said. We sat on the transom bench. The harbor was quiet, the afternoon light going flat and silver over the breakwater. A lobster boat idled somewhere beyond the fuel dock, its engine a low, steady pulse. My wife ran into Linda Souza at the grocery store Tuesday. Ed said. He turned the tackle box latch back and forth with his thumb, a nervous habit I had never seen from him before. Linda told her something. He stopped, cleared his throat. She told her that you have been having serious memory problems, that you got confused driving home from the hardware store last month, that Carolyn has been worried and is trying to figure out what to do. He looked up. She said it like it was already common knowledge, like everyone on Atlantic Road already knew. I held his gaze and said nothing for a moment. The lobster boat beyond the fuel dock cut its engine. The harbor went quieter. "Ed, when did we last go out fishing?" He blinked. 2 Saturdays ago. "Where did we go?" "Halibut Point. North side. Off the ledge where the stripers stack up in October." "What did you catch?" 2 keeper bass, 26 and 29 inches. I lost a third at the boat because I forgot the net." A pause, then a reluctant half smile. "You reminded me 3 times to grab it before we left the dock." "What was the weather?" "Southwest wind, 8 to 12 knots. Overcast. Cleared up around noon. We came in at 2:30 because you had to pick up Tyler from soccer. Did I seem confused to you?" "No," he said flatly, without hesitation. "You seemed like you were running the boat the same way you have run every boat I have ever been on. Sharp, paying attention. You spotted that rip current off the point before I even saw it on the finder." He was quiet for a moment, looking at his hands on the tackle box. "That is why I came over. Because it did not add up. Linda said it like it was fact, like everybody knew. But I was sitting right there with you 2 weeks ago, and the man I was fishing with was not confused about anything." I leaned forward slightly. "Ed, I need to ask you something, and I need you to think about it carefully. I need you to think back over the last month. Every time we have talked, every time you have seen me, every fishing trip, every conversation at the dock. I need you to write it down. Dates, times, what you observed. As specific as you can be." Ed studied me for a long moment. The way a careful man studies something he does not fully understand, but is deciding whether to trust. "This is serious," he said. It was not a question. "Yes." He picked up the tackle box and stood. The leather of his boots creaked on the dock boards. "I will have something for you by Sunday," he said. He started walking up the pier, then stopped and turned back. "Bobby, whatever is going on?" He paused, choosing his words with the deliberate care of a man who does not waste them. "You are not confused. I would stake my own memory on it." He left without waiting for an answer. I sat on the transom and watched him walk up the dock, his step steady on the frost-hardened planks, the tackle box swinging lightly at his side. The harbor stretched out beyond the breakwater, gray and enormous, the way it always looked in late October, when the summer boats were gone, and the water belonged to the people who actually knew it. I thought about Linda Souza at the grocery store. Linda, who had no reason to doubt what she had been told, who would repeat it to the next person she met, who would repeat it to the next. I thought about Sharon Kelly, Carolyn's closest friend, who played bridge with half the women on Atlantic Road. I thought about Dr. Marsh, who had been invited to our house for a routine checkup that was not routine at all. She was not building a case in a courtroom. She was building it in a community, one conversation at a time, one concerned mention at a time, one sympathetic glance at a time. By the time any petition reached a judge, the entire neighborhood would already believe the story was true. She is not just writing me out of my own life, I thought, watching the harbor darken as the afternoon drained away. She is recruiting the whole harbor to hold the pen. I went inside and added Ed's visit to the notebook. Date, time, exact words. The name Linda Souza. The phrase common knowledge. Then I locked the drawer and went to the kitchen to start dinner, because dinner was what a man who had no idea anything was wrong would do on a Friday evening in October. Sal called on a Wednesday evening in early November, just as the last light was draining from the sky beyond the harbor. I was in my study with a book I was not reading, listening to the house settle into its nighttime sounds. "I found something," he said. No greeting, no preamble, just those 3 words in the flat. Careful voice I had come to associate with information I did not want, but needed. "Can you come by tomorrow after hours?" I came through the side door the next evening at 6. The shop was closed and quiet, the workbench lamp burning its small yellow circle in the back room, while everything else stayed gray. Sal was standing at the far wall, where floor-to-ceiling wooden shelves held 24 years of ledger books, each one a different shade of brown, each one dated on the spine in his neat handwriting. He pulled one from the middle shelf without hesitating, opened it to a page marked with a strip of blue painter's tape. "April 10th, he said, and handed it to me. The entry was in his handwriting, methodical and precise. Depth finder unit, Garmin model, customer request, conceal micro-storage device inside lower housing using waterproof marine adhesive per verbal specification. Cash payment. Customer declined to give name. Female, approximately mid-60s. Short silver hair. Navy jacket. Gold wedding band left hand." I read it twice. April 10th. 6 months before I ever touched that depth finder. 6 months before the screen flickered and gave me a reason to walk through Sal's front door. She came in with specific instructions. Sal said. He was watching me read, arms crossed. She knew the model. She knew the housing layout. She knew exactly where she wanted it placed and exactly how she wanted it sealed. He paused. I thought it was unusual at the time. People bring me equipment to repair, not to modify with hidden compartments. But she paid cash. She was polite, and it was not illegal. So I did the work. You remember her? I remember anyone who pays cash and does not give a name. He held my gaze. I remember her specifically because she inspected the finished work for about 30 seconds, without touching it, nodded once, and left, like she was checking a spec sheet. The room was quiet. Outside, the November wind pushed against the shop windows, rattling the sign above the front door, April 10th. I thought about where I had been that Saturday. I had taken Tyler to the aquarium in Boston. I remembered it clearly. The drive up Route 1. Tyler asleep in the back seat by Peabody. The shark tank that held his attention for 45 minutes. I had come home at 6, tired and happy, and Carolyn had been in the kitchen making pasta. She had smiled at me across the counter. While I was watching sharks with my grandson, she was commissioning a hiding place for documents designed to take everything I had. I need this ledger, I said. I made a copy this morning. Sal reached behind the workbench and produced a sealed envelope. Original stays with me. Helen Garza called yesterday. She said it would be better that way. Evidence chain. Evidence chain. I took the envelope, looked at it for a moment. Sal, I do not know how to... Don't, he said simply. He turned back to the shelves and slid the ledger into its place. Just make sure it counts. The next afternoon, Dr. Alan Marsh arrived at our house at 3 o'clock. Carolyn had invited him for what she described as a routine wellness check. She had mentioned it to me that morning over coffee. Casually, the way she mentioned everything that was not casual at all. Dr. Marsh was 58, soft-spoken, the kind of doctor who remembered your children's names. He had been our family physician for 12 years. He set his bag in the living room and settled into the armchair across from me with a folder on his knee. Carolyn sat in the chair beside him, close enough to guide. How have you been feeling, Bobby? Any trouble with concentration or keeping track of things? No more than usual for a man who reads 3 books at once, I said. He smiled, made a note. Any moments of confusion, difficulty remembering recent events. What specifically qualifies as a recent event? He paused. For example, do you remember what you had for dinner 2 nights ago? Grilled swordfish, roasted potatoes, green beans from the garden. I cooked the fish. Carolyn did the potatoes. We watched the news at 7, and I finished a chapter of a Patrick O'Brian novel before bed. I held his gaze. Would you like last Tuesday as well? Carolyn shifted in her seat. He has been like this lately. Very focused on proving he is fine. That is actually one of the things I have been concerned about. Doctor. Marsh wrote something in his folder, but his pen moved slowly, and he did not look at Carolyn when she said it. The visit lasted 20 more minutes. I answered every question accurately. Once I asked him to clarify his methodology, which produced a silence that lasted 4 full seconds. When he stood to leave, he shook my hand. His grip was firm. He held it a half-second longer than a routine farewell required. At the door, he turned back and looked at me. Not at Carolyn. At me. I could not read the expression, but I didn't forget it. Carolyn's caregiver journal was 45 pages long, bound in pale blue, and hidden in the second drawer of the bathroom vanity behind a stack of towels she never used. I found it on the evening of December 1st. She was downstairs cooking. I could hear her moving through the kitchen, the particular rhythm of a woman preparing a meal she had made many times. The click of the burner, the scrape of a pan across the stovetop, the low sound of the radio she sometimes played while she worked. I had gone upstairs to retrieve a novel from my nightstand. That was the truth of it, and also the reason I gave myself permission to notice what I noticed. The drawer was not fully closed, a 1/4 inch of pale blue showing at the corner. Not the kind of thing most people would register. But I had spent 40 years reading instruments, and instruments do not lie unless someone has tampered with them. A drawer left slightly open in a bathroom, Carolyn kept immaculate, was an instrument reading that did not match the bass line. I stood very still, listened to the sounds from the kitchen. Then I lifted the journal out, carried it to the bathroom, closed the door, turned the tap on low, and opened it under the vanity light. The entries were dated and precise. November 3rd. B forgot to lock front door again. Had to remind him twice. He seemed confused about whether he had already done it. November 8th. B could not recall dinner from 2 nights ago when I mentioned it at breakfast. Stared at me blankly for several seconds before changing the subject. November 15th. B seemed confused about his medications this morning. Asked me which ones he was supposed to take. I had to set them out for him. November 21st. B got lost driving home from the hardware store. Called me from the parking lot at Shaw's, disoriented. I had to talk him through the route. I read each entry. 45 pages. Front and back. Everyone dated. Everyone specific. Everyone written in Carolyn's neat, unhurried handwriting. The same hand that had written grocery lists and birthday cards and notes on the kitchen counter for 3.5 decades. Then I took out my phone and opened my own notes. The log I had been keeping since October. Every entry time-stamped automatically by the app. November 3rd. I had been at Ed Barros's house from 1:45 until 5:10 in the afternoon. We had fished from his dock for 2 hours, then sat on his porch drinking coffee. I had locked the front door at 1:38 before leaving. I had a text message to Jess sent from Ed's porch at 3:12 discussing Tyler's birthday gift, which established my location, November 8th. I had made the dinner in question myself. Swordfish. I had the grocery receipt on my phone. Time-stamped 4:27. November 6th. I remembered the meal precisely because the fish market on Main Street had been out of halibut, and I had improvised. November 15th. I had not been confused about my medications. I had questioned Carolyn when she placed an unfamiliar pill beside my glass that morning. She had said, "Doctor." Marsh had recommended it. I had pocketed the pill instead of swallowing it, and made a note in my log. The pill was still in the small envelope in my desk drawer. Waiting, November 21st. I had driven to the hardware store and back without incident. I had not called Carolyn from any parking lot. My phone records would show no outgoing call to her between 8 in the morning and 4 in the afternoon that day. Every entry she had written, every single one, I could refute with a timestamp, a receipt, a text message, a witness, or a phone record. She had invented the days she did not bother to check. She had written her fiction on the assumption that no one would ever hold it against the original. That was the mistake of someone who believed she was the only person keeping records. I photographed every page. 45 pages. Front and back. In under 4 minutes. I put the journal back in the drawer, exactly as I had found it. 1/4-inch gap at the corner. Towel stacked above it. Everything precisely where it had been. I went to the nightstand, picked up my novel, and walked downstairs. From the kitchen, Carolyn's voice, warm and unhurried. "Dinner in about 20 minutes. "Honey, sounds good," I said. I sat at the kitchen table and opened the book to a page I would not remember. And I listened to the sound of her stirring something on the stove, the gentle scrape of a wooden spoon against cast iron. And I thought about 45 pages of careful, dated lies written by a woman who had never once considered that her husband might be paying closer attention than she assumed. She invented the days she did not check, I thought. That is the mistake of someone who was never afraid of being caught. I turned a page of the novel and looked at nothing. She should have been afraid. She placed it beside my coffee at 7:30 in the morning. A single capsule. White. Unmarked. Sitting on the small ceramic dish she used for vitamins. It had not been there when I poured the coffee 4 minutes earlier. She had set it down while my back was turned, while I was reaching for the newspaper on the counter, with the quiet precision of a woman who had rehearsed the gesture until it looked like routine. "Doctor, Marsh called in something new for your blood pressure," Carolyn said. Her back was to me at the sink, her voice completely casual. "He said to start it this week. Take it with food." I looked at the capsule beside the mug. I looked at Carolyn's back. I looked at the capsule again. In the United States, when a doctor prescribes a new medication, the prescription goes directly to the pharmacy. The pharmacy dispenses it in a labeled bottle with dosage instructions, the prescribing physician's name, and the patient's name printed on the label. A doctor does not call a patient's wife and ask her to hand over a single unmarked capsule at breakfast. I picked it up, held it between my thumb and forefinger. Did the pharmacy deliver it? I picked it up yesterday. She turned from the sink with her own coffee, smiling the way you smile at someone who asks unnecessary questions. Marsh said it would take a few weeks to notice the difference. I put the capsule in my mouth, took a long swallow of coffee, felt Carolyn watching me from across the kitchen with a quality of attention that was not quite watching, and not quite not watching. Then she turned to rinse her mug, and I pressed my tongue against the roof of my mouth and moved the capsule into the paper napkin in my palm. I folded the napkin, put it in my shirt pocket. "Good," she said, still at the sink. "He said to take it every morning. I will set it out for you." "Appreciate it," I said, and opened the newspaper. I drove to Harbor Pharmacy on Main Street 40 minutes later, after Carolyn left for her Tuesday morning errands. Ray Corbin was behind the dispensing counter when I came in. He was 44, careful-eyed, the kind of pharmacist who read every label twice and counted every pill by hand. I had known him 6 years, long enough to trust his precision and his discretion. I asked to speak with him privately. He led me to the small consultation room behind the counter without asking why. I set the napkin on the table between us and unfolded it. "I need to know what this is," I said. "My wife gave it to me this morning. She said it was prescribed by our family doctor. It wasn't in a labeled bottle. I have reason to believe it wasn't prescribed at all." Ray put on gloves, picked up the capsule, and examined it under the desk lamp. He turned it twice, then opened it carefully over a small glass dish. White powder inside. He looked at it for a long moment. "I need to run this through analysis," he said. "Give me until noon." I sat in my truck in the parking lot and waited. At 11:48, Ray called. "Mr. Hale, can you come back inside?" He had the result printed on a single sheet of paper. He set it on the desk and folded his hands. "Warfarin," he said, 0.75 milligrams. That is roughly triple the standard initial dose for a patient with an indicated condition. He paused. "You are currently taking daily low-dose aspirin. Is that correct?" "For 12 years. Warfarin and aspirin are both blood thinners. They work through different mechanisms, but the combined anticoagulant effect is compounded. At this dosage of warfarin, in combination with your daily aspirin, the risk of spontaneous internal hemorrhage is significant." He looked at me steadily. "In a 67-year-old man, it could present as a hemorrhagic stroke. It would look entirely consistent with natural causes to any responding physician." The room was very still. The fluorescent light hummed above us. "How long," I asked, "before symptoms became critical? 6 to 8 hours? Maybe less, depending on activity level. And it would be very difficult to detect afterward, unless someone specifically tested for warfarin levels, which a standard autopsy panel would not include." He paused again. "Mr. Hale, I need to tell you something else. I pulled our records this morning. Your wife purchased warfarin on 3 separate occasions: August 28th, September 19th, and October 14th, each time in cash, each time without a prescription on file." He held my gaze. "We keep records of every dispensation regardless of payment method. I have camera footage with timestamps for all 3 purchases." I looked at the printed result on the desk. Warfarin, 0.75 milligrams. 3 purchases. Cash. No prescription. Call Helen Garza, I said. I called her 40 minutes ago, Ray said. I picked up the result, folded it carefully, and put it in my jacket pocket next to the USB drive and the notebook and 35 years of a life I was apparently not supposed to finish. I called Helen from the pharmacy parking lot before I started the truck. She picked up on the second ring. I read her the result from memory. Warfarin, 0.75 milligrams. Triple the standard initial dose. 3 purchases over 3 months. Cash. No prescription. Combined with daily aspirin, potentially fatal within 6 to 8 hours. Presentation consistent with natural hemorrhagic stroke. Helen was quiet for 4 seconds. I counted. That is attempted murder, she said. Her voice had not changed in pitch or speed, but something underneath it had shifted. The focused energy of someone watching a structure lock into place. Purchasing a prescription anticoagulant without a valid prescription and administering it covertly to a person taking a contraindicated medication at a dosage designed to cause life-threatening hemorrhage. The DA's office will review that as conspiracy to commit murder. Class A felony. Up to 30 years. A pause. This is Layer 3, Bobby. I know. Ray Corbin has the pharmaceutical records and the camera footage. I spoke with him before you arrived. He is prepared to provide everything through proper channels. Another pause. Do not change your behavior. Do not refuse the pill tomorrow. Pretend to take it the same way you did today. We need the pattern to continue until we are ready. Understood. How are you? It was the first time she had asked me that. Not as a formality. As an actual question. I am still here, I said. Good. Stay that way. Go home. I started the truck and pulled out of the lot onto Main Street. The December afternoon was flat and gray, the kind of New England sky that looks like it was poured from a bucket. I drove the long way home, down Commercial Street past the harbor, past the fish processing plant with its gull circling the roof, past the old paint factory that had been converted to condominiums 5 years ago. The harbor was steel-colored and still. A single trawler sat at the fuel dock, its outriggers folded like the wings of a resting bird. I turned onto Atlantic Road. Carolyn was in the front yard, watering the winter planter she kept by the porch steps. She looked up when my truck pulled into the driveway and waved. A small wave. The wave of a woman who is tending her garden on a December afternoon and is glad to see her husband come home. I waved back. Layer 3, I thought. Parking the truck. Done. That evening, I sat in my study with the door closed, the desk lamp on, the rest of the house dark and quiet around me. Carolyn had gone to bed at 9:30. I could hear her moving around upstairs, the familiar sequence of sounds I had memorized over 15 years in this house. Bathroom faucet, cabinet door, the soft weight of her settling into the mattress. Then quiet. I opened the notebook and wrote the date. Wrote the word, warfarin. Wrote the dosage. Wrote the 3 purchase dates Ray had given me. Drew a line connecting them to the email from the memory card. Once Bobby gets the diagnosis, we close everything within 30 days. The diagnosis was never going to be real. The medication was going to create the symptoms that justified the diagnosis, that authorized the guardianship that transferred everything I owned to a woman who had spent 3 years building a machine to erase me. My phone buzzed at 9:47. The screen showed a number I recognized. Margaret Liu, the woman who had managed our household accounts for 7 years. Margaret did not call after 9. That was a rule she had kept without exception. I picked up before the second ring. "Margaret." I kept my voice low. "Mr. Hale. I am sorry to call so late." Her voice was compressed, slightly rushed. The voice of someone calling from a room they were not sure was private. "I needed to talk to you outside of regular hours." "Go ahead. Miss Hale called me yesterday. She wants me to finalize the property transfer documents before the 10th of this month." A pause. I told her I needed your original signature on the transfer authorization, not a scan, not a copy. The original. She said she would handle it. Another pause. Longer. I asked again today. She told me, and I'm quoting, that she hired me to complete paperwork, not to ask questions. I said nothing. I let the silence do what silence does when someone needs space to say the thing they are trying to say. "Mr. Hale." Her voice dropped. "I have been doing this for 22 years. When a client tells me not to ask about signatures on a property transfer, that is not something I can process. I could lose my certification." She stopped. "But more than that, it does not feel right. None of this feels right." Something shifted in my chest. Not warmth. More like the feeling of watching a dock piling hold against a storm surge when you were not certain it would. "Margaret, I need you to do 2 things. First, do not finalize any document without my original in-person signature, not for any reason. Second, do not tell her you called me." A long pause. "Is everything all right?" "Not entirely," I said. "But it will be." I heard her exhale slowly. "I have copies of everything she has sent me," she said quietly. "Every instruction, every document draft, every email. Keep them, keep every single one." After I hung up, I stood at the study window. The harbor was invisible beyond the rooftops, but I could smell it through the gap at the sill. Salt and distance and the particular cold of December water. She is running out of time, I thought. And when people run out of time, they make mistakes. Helen called at 7:58 in the morning. I was in the kitchen, coffee poured, newspaper open, performing the routine I had performed every morning for 2 months now, with the discipline of a man who understands that the smallest deviation could collapse everything. "Come in," she said. No greeting. "Now, if you can." I was at her office by 8:45. She was standing at the window when I entered, which was unusual. Helen Garza was a woman who sat at tables and worked from them. She was not a person who stood at windows. She turned when I came in and pointed to the chair across from her desk without sitting down herself. "Doctor, Marsh called me last night," she said. I went very still. He found my number through the Bar Association directory. She finally sat, picked up her pen, set it down again. The closest thing to restlessness I had ever seen from her. He said he was asked to create a medical record establishing a pattern of cognitive decline in a patient he has known for 12 years. He said he met with that patient recently and found no evidence of cognitive decline whatsoever. She looked at me directly. He said he was not comfortable with what he had been asked to do, and he wanted the patient to know. The room was quiet. "He did not know you were already my client." Helen continued. "He just wanted to reach whoever was protecting you." She paused. "He has already contacted Doctor. Linda Okafor at a Mass General affiliate clinic in Beverly. She is a neurologist, independent, no prior relationship with your family. He asked her to conduct a proper evaluation. Another pause. He also said he intends to file a voluntary report with the Massachusetts Board of Registration in Medicine, acknowledging that he allowed himself to be guided by a family member in creating documentation that he now believes was not medically justified. I sat with that for a moment. In 40 years on the water, I had watched equipment fail and equipment hold. The pieces that held under pressure were always the ones you had not built into your plan. The unexpected redundancies. The parts that were not supposed to matter, but did. He is doing the right thing, I said. He is, Helen said. Late, but he is. She opened the folder on her desk. He is also providing a written statement that Carolyn Hale initiated contact with him in September and specifically requested documentation of memory concerns. She looked up. Bobby, this changes the shape of everything. I thought about the look on Dr. Marsh's face at my front door 3 weeks ago. The held handshake. The glance back that I could not read at the time. He had been trying to tell me something. He just had not found the words yet. When can I see Dr. Okafor? I asked. Wednesday, 10 o'clock. Beverly campus. She paused. Bring Jess. Dr. Okafor's office was on the 3rd floor, with windows facing east that let in the flat December light without apology. She was 55, with reading glasses pushed up into gray-streaked hair and the particular stillness of someone who had spent decades listening carefully. She shook my hand, then Jess's, and showed us both to chairs. I want to be clear about something before we begin, she said. I have not reviewed any prior documentation. I asked Dr. Marsh not to send me anything. I want a clean baseline. She looked at me. Is that acceptable? More than acceptable. The assessment took 90 minutes. She administered the MOCA first, 30 points covering short-term memory, visuospatial ability, executive function, attention, language, and orientation. Then a modified MMSE. Then 40 minutes of clinical interview, during which she asked about my career on commercial fishing vessels, my daily routines, my reading habits, and my opinion on the decline of independent boatyards in New England, which led to a 15-minute conversation she periodically interrupted with a quiet note on her legal pad. Jess sat in the corner chair without speaking. She watched her father answer every question with the unhurried precision of a man who had spent 4 decades making decisions in open water and trusted his own mind completely. Halfway through the interview, I noticed her fold her hands in her lap, the way a person does when something they were bracing for does not happen. When Dr. Okafor finished, she set her pen down. Mr. Hale, she said, your cognitive function is fully intact. Short-term and long-term memory are within normal range for a healthy 67-year-old. Executive function is notably strong. There is no evidence of any cognitive decline that would warrant further evaluation, let alone legal intervention. She signed the bottom of the 4th page of her report and handed me a copy across the desk. 4 pages, signed, dated. Clinic letterhead. I will have the full written assessment to your attorney by end of day. We stood to leave. At the door. Doctor. Okafor spoke once more. Her voice had shifted, still professional, but with something underneath that sounded like carefully restrained anger on my behalf. Mr. Hale. No one should have to come here to prove themselves. I held the door open for Jess. No. I agreed. They should not. The morning after Dr. Okafor's evaluation, I sat in my study with the 4-page report spread across the desk like a nautical chart. Every line confirmed what I already knew. My mind was sound, my memory intact, my executive function normal. But reading it in clinical language, signed and dated by an independent neurologist, gave the words a weight that my own certainty never could. I picked up the phone and called Helen Garza. "I have the report," I said. "I know. Dr. Okafor's office sent it 40 minutes ago." Helen paused. "Bobby, we have all 3 layers: physical evidence, financial fraud, and attempted murder via warfarin. The question now is how you want to use them." I had thought about this through the night. A man who spends 40 years reading the ocean learns that timing matters more than strength. You don't fight a nor'easter head-on. You wait for the eye, then you turn the wheel. "I want a family meeting," I said. "Everyone in one room. Carolyn, Marcus, Dennis Wakefield if we can get him there, and Margaret Liu on the phone." Helen was quiet for a moment. "That's not the safest legal approach. I could file criminal charges tomorrow. Attempted murder. Fraud. Forgery. The district attorney would move fast with what we have." "I know." "Then why the meeting?" I looked out the window. The harbor was flat. December light turning the water into a sheet of brushed steel. 2 lobster boats sat motionless at the dock, their hulls dark against the silver. "Because Marcus deserves to hear the truth from me," I said. "Not from a courtroom, not from a news article. From his father, in his father's house." Helen exhaled slowly. "All right. But we do it my way. I'll be present. Jess will record everything. And I want a police officer outside the front door, not inside. Just close enough." "Agreed." "When?" "Saturday, 4 days from now. December 14th. She paused again. "That gives Carolyn 4 more days to act. Are you comfortable with that risk?" I thought about the white capsule that would appear beside my coffee in an hour. I thought about the napkin in my pocket, the pharmacy bag in the glove box, the routine I had maintained for 11 days without a single deviation. "She won't change the pattern," I said. "People who believe they're winning never adjust their course." After hanging up, I opened my laptop and drafted 3 documents. The first was a letter to Marcus, not to send yet, but to organize my thoughts. I wrote about the boat, about the mornings we spent hauling traps off Eastern Point before he turned 16, about the afternoon he told me he wanted to study marine biology instead of fishing, and how I told him that understanding the sea was just another way of loving it. I wrote that what he would hear on Saturday would hurt, but that I had waited specifically so he could hear it whole, not in pieces filtered through lawyers and strangers. The second document was a timeline. I printed everything Helen and I had compiled, the micro SD card contents, Nina's signature analysis, the bank transfers, Ed Barros's testimony, Ray Corbin's warfarin report, Dr. Marcia's confession, and Dr. Okafor's evaluation. I organized them into 3 colored folders: blue for physical evidence, green for financial fraud, red for attempted murder. Each folder had a table of contents, numbered tabs, and a 1-page summary on top. The third document was shorter. A single page addressed to Margaret Liu, authorizing her to release all original property documents to Helen Garza's office, and to refuse any further requests from Carolyn Hale without written consent from both Robert James Hale and his legal representative. I signed it, dated it, December 10th. By noon, I had driven to Helen's office and delivered all 3 folders. Jess photographed every page before filing the originals in the office safe. Helen reviewed the timeline, made 2 corrections, a transposed date on the bank transfer, and a misspelling of Dennis Wakefield's middle initial, and declared the package complete. 3 layers, she said, tapping the red folder. Financial conspiracy, identity fraud, and attempted homicide by poisoning. Any one of these would be enough. Together, they're a wall. I nodded. Saturday. Helen walked me to the door. Bobby, one more thing. I called the Gloucester Police Department this morning. Detective Paul Arnett will be available on the 14th. He's handled domestic fraud cases before. Discreet. Experienced. He'll park on the street and wait for my signal. I shook her hand and stepped into the cold. The wind had shifted northeast, carrying the smell of open water and diesel. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment, letting it hit my face. 40 years on the Atlantic taught me that every storm has a turning point, a moment when the wind shifts and the boat stops fighting and starts moving with purpose. Standing outside Helen's office with 3 folders locked in her safe and a date circled on the calendar, I felt that shift. For weeks I had been gathering, recording, hiding, defensive work, survival work. But now the wheel was turning. Saturday, I would stop surviving and start steering. I drove home. Carolyn was in the kitchen, slicing bread for lunch. She smiled when I walked in. "You were out early," she said. "Hardware store," I replied. "Needed a new latch for the shed." She nodded, set a plate in front of me, and placed a white capsule beside my glass of water. "Don't forget your supplement," she said. I palmed the pill, brought my hand to my mouth, took a long drink of water, and slipped the capsule into my shirt pocket. "Thank you," I said. She turned back to the counter. I ate my sandwich in silence, watching December light move across the kitchen floor, counting the hours until Saturday. Wednesday passed without incident. Thursday began the same way. Coffee, capsule, napkin, pocket. Carolyn moved through the house with the ease of a woman who believed her calendar was on schedule. She hummed while folding laundry. She called her sister in Vermont and laughed for 20 minutes about a cousin's divorce. She asked me twice if I had taken my supplement. I told her yes both times. By Thursday afternoon, I had received 3 calls. The first was from Helen, confirming that Detective Arnett would arrive on Prospect Street at 3:15 Saturday, park 4 houses down, and remain in his vehicle unless Helen sent a text with a single word "now." The second was from Margaret Liu, who reported that Carolyn had called her office again that morning, requesting the finalized property transfer documents. Margaret told her they were still under review. The third call was from a number I did not recognize. I answered it in my study with the door closed. "Mr. Hale." The voice was male, mid-40s. "Careful." "My name is Dennis Wakefield." I sat down slowly. In 14 emails, I had read his words calculated, precise, always directing Carolyn toward the next step. But I had never heard his voice. It was softer than I expected, almost polite. "I'm listening," I said. I understand you may be aware of certain arrangements involving your wife and myself. I want you to know that my involvement was limited to financial consultation. Nothing more. Financial consultation, I repeated. That's correct. Mrs. Hale approached me in early 2023 regarding asset management and estate restructuring. I provided advice, standard services. I let the silence stretch. On the water, silence is a tool. It tells you what the other person is hiding by how quickly they try to fill the space. Wakefield filled it in 4 seconds. I had no knowledge of any medical component, he said. None. Whatever has happened on that front is entirely outside my involvement. I reached for the pen on my desk and wrote the time 3:47 p.m. and the phrase denies medical knowledge on a notepad. Mr. Wakefield, I said, I appreciate the call. I have one question. Of course. Compass Point Holdings. Who owns it? Another silence. This one lasted longer 7 seconds by the clock on my wall. I'm not at liberty to discuss client structures, he said. Then I'll find out Saturday, I replied, and hung up. I sat with the phone in my hand for a full minute. Wakefield had called me directly, without prompting, without a lawyer present, and had volunteered a denial about the medical component before I had mentioned it. In my experience, a man who denies something you haven't accused him of is a man who knows exactly what he's done. I called Helen immediately and relayed the conversation word for word. She listened without interrupting. He's scared, she said when I finished. Someone told him we're moving. Possibly Carolyn. Possibly his own attorney. Either way, that call is a gift. He placed himself in the narrative voluntarily. Jess will pull his phone records Friday if he called from a registered line. We have a direct link. Will this change Saturday? No. It strengthens it. If Wakefield shows up, we have a live witness who already contradicted himself on record. If he doesn't, his absence speaks just as loud. I thanked her and hung up. The house was quiet. Through the study window I could see the harbor, the masts of the sailboats in winter storage, tilting slightly in the wind, like metronomes keeping time for a song no one was playing. Friday morning arrived cold and bright. I woke at 5:30, an old habit from decades of pre-dawn departures. Carolyn was still asleep. I dressed in the dark, went downstairs, and made coffee. The house was silent except for the furnace cycling on and the faint creak of the floorboards under my weight. I took my mug to the front porch and stood in the December air. Across the street, the Hendersons' Christmas lights blinked red and green against the gray clapboard. A delivery truck rumbled down Rogers Street toward the docks. Somewhere, a dog barked twice and stopped. I thought about Marcus. I had not called him about Saturday. Helen had agreed to contact him directly, a formal request from my attorney to attend a family matter at the house. 4 o'clock. Important, but not urgent. I did not want my voice to betray anything. I did not want him to hear the weight in my words and start asking questions I could not yet answer. The letter I had written for him was in the top drawer of my desk, sealed in a plain white envelope with his name on the front in my handwriting. He would receive it Saturday, after everything was said. Not before. The truth deserved a proper sequence spoken first, then written. So the paper became a record of what he already knew, rather than a substitute for what I should have said in person. I finished my coffee and went inside. Carolyn came downstairs at 7:15, hair brushed, wearing the blue cardigan I had bought her 3 Christmases ago. She smiled, poured her coffee, and set a white capsule beside my plate. "Morning," she said. "Morning," I said. I palmed the pill, drank my water, slipped the capsule into my pocket. 47 days of practice. The motion was seamless now. Wrist, fingers, fabric invisible as a card trick performed 1,000 times. Tomorrow the trick would end. Tomorrow I would lay every card on the table. I spent the morning the way I had spent every Saturday morning for 35 years, slowly. Coffee on the porch, the newspaper open, but unread. The harbor visible through bare maple branches. Carolyn made eggs and toast. She set the white capsule beside my plate at 7:40. I palmed it. 48 days. At noon, I showered, dressed in a clean flannel shirt and dark trousers, and went to the basement. In the far corner, behind a shelf of paint cans, I retrieved the leather satchel I had placed there Wednesday night. Inside were photocopies of every document the 3 folders lived in Helen's safe. But I wanted a set in the house, at the table, within arm's reach. Blue, green, red. I checked each one, counted the tabs, and closed the satchel. Carolyn left at 1:30 to get her hair done. She told me she would be back by 3. She kissed my cheek on her way out, and the casual warmth of it was so practiced, so perfectly ordinary, that I stood in the doorway for a long time after her car disappeared around the corner. At 2:15, Helen arrived with Jess. They came through the back door, as planned. Jess set up a small digital recorder on the bookshelf in the living room, angled toward the dining table, but partially hidden behind a framed photograph of Marcus at his college graduation. Helen tested the audio twice, adjusted the volume, and nodded. "Recording is live from this point forward," she said. We arranged the room. I moved the dining table to the center, set 5 chairs around it. Helen placed a legal pad and pen at her seat. I put the leather satchel on the floor beside my chair, unopened. At 3:12, my phone buzzed. A text from Helen's number, Arnett confirmed. "Gray sedan, 4 houses east. Standing by." At 3:40, Marcus walked through the front door. He was wearing a wool coat I hadn't seen before, and he looked tired. He hugged me, a real hug, both arms, his chin on my shoulder, and when he pulled back, his eyes were searching. "Dad, what's going on?" "Your lawyer called me." "Sit down, son. I'll explain everything when everyone is here." He looked at Helen, then at Jess, then back at me. He sat. At 3:55, Carolyn returned. Her hair was freshly styled, and she wore the pearl earrings I had given her on our 30th anniversary. She saw Helen and Jess and stopped in the hallway. "Bobby, who are these people?" "Carolyn, this is Helen Garza, my attorney, and her associate, Jess. Please sit down." Something shifted behind her eyes, a flicker, fast as a match strike. But she composed herself and sat across from me, folding her hands on the table the way she always did at dinner, as if this were simply another meal. "Thank you all for coming," I said. I did not raise my voice. I spoke the way I spoke on the boat when the weather turned steady. Clear. No wasted words. 35 years ago I married you, Carolyn, on a Saturday afternoon in October. It rained, and you said the rain was good luck. I believed that for a long time. I reached down and lifted the satchel onto the table, unclasped it, removed the blue folder first. "This is physical evidence," I said. I opened it and slid the first page toward the center of the table. A contract for the sale of the Lucky Penny to a company called Compass Point Holdings for $380,000. The signature on this contract is mine, except I never signed it. Carolyn's hands remained folded. She did not look at the page, or I placed Nina Tran's signature analysis beside it. "This is a forensic report from Cape Ann Savings Bank confirming the signature is forged. 3-degree angular deviation, consistent across all samples. A practiced copy, but not mine." Marcus leaned forward. He picked up the analysis, read the first paragraph, and set it down without speaking. I opened the green folder. "This is financial evidence. 14 emails between you, Carolyn, and a man named Dennis Wakefield, spanning June through September of this year. They discuss asset transfers, guardianship timelines, and a diagnosis that doesn't exist." I spread the printed emails across the table like a hand of cards. "There's also a $60,000 wire transfer from Wakefield to your personal account, dated March 2023, and 3 separate transfers from our joint account totaling $380,000, each structured below $90,000 to avoid federal reporting." Carolyn unfolded her hands. She placed them flat on the table. Fingers spread. Her jaw tightened, but she said nothing. I lifted the red folder. The room was silent. Even the furnace had stopped cycling, as though the house itself was holding its breath. "This," I said, "is the medical evidence." I opened it and placed Ray Corbin's pharmacy report on the table. The warfarin analysis, the dosage confirmation, the 3 cash purchase records with security camera timestamps. "For 48 days, I said, you have placed a white capsule beside my coffee every morning. You told me it was a supplement prescribed by Dr. Marsh. It was not. It was warfarin 0.75 milligrams, 3 times the standard initial dose. Combined with my daily aspirin, it was designed to cause a hemorrhagic stroke that would appear natural." Marcus stood up. His chair scraped the floor. He looked at his mother, then at me, then at the red folder. "Damn," he said. His voice broke on the single syllable. "Sit down." "Marcus," I said gently. "There's more." Marcus sat back down. His hands were shaking. He pressed them flat against his knees the way I had taught him to steady himself on the boat during rough seas, palms down, weight forward. "Breathe." I placed the final document from the red folder on the table. "Dr. Okafor's 4-page neurological evaluation, dated December 4th. Signed and stamped by Massachusetts General Hospital's Beverly affiliate. This is an independent cognitive assessment," I said, "conducted by Dr. Linda Okafor, a board-certified neurologist with no connection to this family. She examined me for 90 minutes. Her conclusion is on page 3. I opened to the page and read aloud. "Mr. Hale demonstrates fully intact cognitive function across all domains tested. There is no clinical evidence of decline warranting medical intervention or legal action regarding competency." I set the report down and looked at Carolyn. "You built a case that I was losing my mind," I said. "You hired a doctor to write false records. You created a 45-page caregiver journal documenting episodes that never happened. You filed 80% of a guardianship petition. And when the paperwork wasn't moving fast enough, you started putting poison in my coffee. Carolyn lifted her eyes. For 35 years, I had read that face across the breakfast table, across the pillow, across hospital waiting rooms, when Marcus broke his arm at 12. I knew every line, every shift, every mask. What I saw now was not guilt. It was calculation. She was measuring what she could still salvage. "Bobby," she said. Her voice was calm and low. "You're confused. Doctor, Marsh told me you've been having episodes forgetting appointments, repeating questions. I was worried about you. Everything I did was because I love you. And I was scared." Helen spoke for the first time. "Mrs. Hale. Doctor, Alan Marsh voluntarily contacted my office on December 5th. He stated, under his own initiative, that he was asked to fabricate medical documentation suggesting cognitive decline in a patient he found to be fully competent. He has filed a report with the Massachusetts Board of Registration in Medicine. His statement is included in the blue folder. Tab 7. Carolyn's composure cracked. Not dramatically, no tears, no shouting. A single muscle beneath her left eye twitched. Her fingers curled inward, nails pressing against the wood. "That's a lie," she said. "It's a signed statement," Helen replied, notarized. Marcus spoke. His voice was hoarse but steady. "Mom, the emails. I just read 3 of them. That's your email address. That's your writing. You sign off every message the same way, initial C, period, dash. You've done that since I was in high school." Carolyn turned to her son. For the first time, something real crossed her face. Not strategy, not performance, but fear. The fear of a woman watching the one person she thought would never question her begin to see clearly. "Marcus, sweetheart, I can explain." "Then explain the warfarin," he said. "Explain why Dad has been swallowing poison for 48 days. "He wasn't swallowing it," I said quietly. Everyone looked at me. I reached into my shirt pocket and placed a single white capsule on the table beside the red folder. "I haven't taken a single one," I said. Every morning for 48 days, I palmed the pill and kept it. Ray Corbin at Harbor Pharmacy identified the compound on day 1. The first capsule is sealed in an evidence bag in Helen's office. The rest are documented dates, times, photographs. Carolyn stared at the capsule on the table as though it were a living thing. The room was silent for 10 seconds. I counted them the way I count seconds between lightning and thunder, each one a measure of distance, of how close the strike has come. Helen picked up her phone and typed a single word. 30 seconds later, the front doorbell rang. Jess opened it. Detective Paul Arnett stepped inside mid-50s, gray hair cropped short, wearing a dark jacket and no tie. He nodded to Helen, glanced around the room, and settled his eyes on Carolyn. "Mrs. Hale," he said. "I'm Detective Arnett, Gloucester Police Department. I've been briefed on the evidence compiled by your husband's legal counsel, including allegations of financial fraud, identity forgery, and attempted poisoning. I'm here to inform you that a formal investigation is being opened. You are not under arrest at this time, but I strongly advise you to retain legal counsel before making any further statements. Carolyn did not move. Her hands remained on the table, fingers curled, the pearl earrings catching the overhead light. Marcus stood again. This time he did not look at his mother. He walked around the table, stood beside my chair, and put his hand on my shoulder. He did not speak. He did not need to. I reached up and placed my hand over his. Detective Arnett asked Carolyn to accompany him to the station for a voluntary interview. Helen advised her that she had the right to decline, but that the evidence would proceed regardless. Carolyn looked at the 3 folders spread across the table. Blue, green, red, and for one moment her mask fell completely. Beneath it was not the woman I had married. Beneath it was someone I had never met. She stood, picked up her purse from the hallway table, and walked out the front door without a word. Arnett followed. The door closed. Through the window, I watched the gray sedan pull away from the curb. Carolyn in the passenger seat, her face turned toward the harbor. Marcus sat in the chair beside me. The house ticked and settled around us. How long have you known? He asked. 7 weeks, I said. Why didn't you tell me? I looked at my son, 29 years old, his mother's jaw, my father's eyes, because I needed you to hear all of it at once. I said, not in pieces, not in guesses, the whole truth, in the right order, so you could decide for yourself what to believe. He nodded slowly. Then he leaned forward, elbows on the table, and pressed his hands against his face. His shoulders shook once. Just once. I sat beside him and waited. The way a captain waits when the storm finally breaks, not fighting, not fleeing, just steady at the wheel. Marcus and I sat at the dining table until the sky outside turned dark. Neither of us moved the folders. They stayed where Bobby had spread them, blue, green, red, like signal flags on a mast, each one telling a different part of the same distress call. At 6:30, Marcus got up and made 2 cups of coffee. He brought them back without a word, set mine on the table, and sat down again. The small gesture, the way he remembered that I'd take it black, no sugar, the way he placed the mug at my right hand without asking, was enough to undo something in my chest that I had kept tightly wound for 7 weeks. I'm sorry I didn't call more, he said. You don't need to apologize for that. I should have noticed something. She made sure you wouldn't. I held the mug in both hands. The distance between us this fall, the canceled dinners, the short phone calls that wasn't accidental. Carolyn told you I was forgetful, irritable, not myself. She framed every gap as evidence that I was declining. So when you pulled back, it looked like a son giving his aging father space. It was manufactured. Marcus closed his eyes. When he opened them, they were wet but clear. What happens now, he asked. I told him what Helen had explained to me that morning. The Gloucester Police Department would conduct a formal investigation based on 3 charges, financial fraud and forgery, related to the Compass Point Holdings transfers. Identity fraud, related to the forged boat sale contract and guardianship petition. And attempted murder by poisoning. The Essex County District Attorney's Office would receive the case file Monday morning. Helen expected arraignment within 2 weeks, if the DA moved at the pace she anticipated. And Dennis Wakefield, Marcus asked. Helen is handling that. What I did not tell Marcus, because Helen had asked me to wait, was what Jess had uncovered Friday afternoon while pulling Wakefield's phone records. The call Wakefield made to me Thursday was placed from a registered business line belonging to Compass Point Holdings, LLC, Jess traced the LLC registration through the Massachusetts Secretary of State's office. Compass Point Holdings was incorporated in February 2023, 1 month before the first $60,000 wire transfer appeared in Carolyn's account. The registered agent was not Dennis Wakefield. It was Russell Firth, Carolyn's brother. Helen told me Saturday morning, an hour before the family meeting. She stood in my kitchen holding a printout from the state database, and for the first time since I had hired her, I saw genuine surprise on her face. "Bobby," she had said, "your brother-in-law owns the company that bought your boat." I had not been surprised. A captain learns that currents run in families. Russell had visited us 3 times in 2023, once in March, once in June, once in September. Each visit coincided with a major transaction on the timeline. He brought wine and told stories about his real estate business in New Hampshire. He shook my hand warmly every time. I remember thinking how pleasant he was, how much effort he made to include me in conversation while Carolyn cooked in the kitchen. Now I understood the effort. Helen filed a supplemental report with Detective Arnett Saturday evening, adding Russell Firth as a co-conspirator. Arnett confirmed that Wakefield had already retained counsel and declined the voluntary interview. Russell had not yet been contacted. Sunday morning, I drove to Helen's office. The streets were quiet, Christmas lights glowing on every porch. Jess had prepared a revised timeline, 47 entries now, with Russell's name woven through 12 of them. The pattern was clear. Wakefield handled the legal and financial architecture. Carolyn provided access and information, and Russell supplied the capital and the shell company. 3 people, 3 roles, 1 objective to strip me of my assets, my autonomy, and eventually my life, and make it look like the natural decline of an old man losing his grip. Helen laid it out on the conference table, each entry printed on a separate card, arranged chronologically. "The DA will see this Monday," she said. "Financial conspiracy, fraud, forgery, and attempted homicide. 3 defendants. The warfarin alone carries up to 20 years. I looked at the cards spread across the table and thought about charts. Nautical charts the way every depth marking, every current arrow, every shoal warning exists to keep a vessel from running aground. Helen had built a chart of betrayal, and every marking pointed toward the same shallow water. "There's one more thing," Helen said. She handed me a sealed envelope. "This arrived at my office yesterday afternoon. Courier delivery. No return address." I opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, handwritten. The writing was Carolyn's. It read, "Bobby, I never meant for it to go this far. You were supposed to sign the papers and move to the cottage in Brunswick. That was the original plan. The rest was Russell's idea. I know you won't believe me, and I don't expect you to. But I want you to know that the first 20 years were real." See, I read it twice, folded it, placed it back in the envelope and handed it to Helen. "Add it to the file," I said. Helen nodded. She did not ask how I felt. She knew me well enough by now to understand that I would process it the way I processed everything silently, in my own time, on my own water. I drove home. Marcus was sitting on the front porch in my chair, a blanket around his shoulders, watching the harbor. He had stayed the night. He looked up when I parked and raised his coffee mug in a half wave. I sat beside him. The December wind was steady from the northeast, carrying salt and cold, and the low horn of a freighter passing beyond the breakwater. "Dad," Marcus said, "when this is over, I want to take the boat out. Just us. Like we used to." I looked at the harbor, at the Lucky Penny resting at the dock, her hull dark against the winter water. She's not going anywhere, I said. Neither am I. Monday morning, Helen called at 8:15. Her voice carried the measured energy of a woman who had slept 3 hours and considered it sufficient. The DA's office received the full case file at 7:40, she said. Assistant District Attorney Karen Price is assigned. She's experienced, prosecuted a spousal fraud homicide case in Salem 2 years ago. She wants to meet you Wednesday. Wednesday, I repeated. The word felt ordinary, like a day that belonged to grocery lists and oil changes, not criminal proceedings. 10 o'clock, Essex County Courthouse. Jess and I will be there. Wear what you wore Saturday flannel. Dark trousers. You're a retired fisherman. Bobby. Not a Wall Street banker. Let them see that. I told her I understood. At noon, Detective Arnett called with an update. Carolyn had retained attorney Mitchell Dwyer, a defense lawyer from Boston, with a reputation for high-profile domestic cases. She had posted no bail because no arrest had been made, yet the DA was building the formal complaint. Arnett expected arrest warrants for all 3 defendants by the end of the week. All 3, I asked. Carolyn Hale, Dennis Wakefield, and Russell Firth. Separate warrants. Wakefield's attorney has already signaled he may cooperate in exchange for reduced charges. That's between him and the DA, but it's a good sign for your side. I thanked him and hung up. Wakefield turning was not surprising. A man who calls you before you call him is a man looking for the nearest exit. His cooperation would likely confirm what Jess had already traced, that Russell provided the seed money. Wakefield designed the financial structure, and Carolyn executed the daily operation. 3 anchors on one chain, and now the first was dragging. Tuesday I spent with Marcus. We did not talk about the case. We drove to Rockport in the morning and ate breakfast at a diner on Bearskin Neck that we used to visit when he was a boy. He ordered the same thing he had ordered at 14 scrambled eggs, rye toast, orange juice. I ordered coffee and a blueberry muffin and watched him eat the way a father watches a son he almost lost not to death, but to a carefully constructed distance that was never the boy's fault. After breakfast, we walked along the granite pier. The wind was sharp, and the sea was a deep winter green, the kind of color that only appears in December when the light sits low and the water holds the cold like a memory. Marcus asked about Ed Barros, about Sal Medeiros, about the people in town who had heard rumors. I told him what I knew that Ed had warned me early, that Sal had found the card, that the community had watched from the edges without fully understanding what they were seeing. Small towns talk, I said, but the people who matter acted. Marcus nodded. He picked up a flat stone from the pier and skipped it across the harbor 3 bounces before it sank. An old habit from childhood. I remembered teaching him the wrist motion on this same pier, his small hand inside mine. The stone wobbling on the first try and flying clean on the third. I want to be at the courthouse Wednesday, he said. You don't have to. I know. I want to. Wednesday at 10 o'clock, I sat in a conference room on the 3rd floor of the Essex County Courthouse. Karen Price was younger than I expected, early 40s. Dark hair pulled back, reading glasses perched on her nose. She shook my hand firmly and asked me to walk her through the timeline from the beginning. I spoke for 40 minutes. Helen supplemented with documents when needed, sliding the relevant page across the table at each point. Price listened without interrupting, taking notes in a small leather journal. When I finished ending with the family meeting, the 3 folders, and Carolyn walking out the front door, she closed the journal and removed her glasses. Mr. Hale, she said. In 20 years of prosecution, I have seen financial fraud, I have seen domestic manipulation, and I have seen attempted homicide. I have rarely seen all three executed by the same group against the same victim with this level of documentation. Your attorney has done exceptional work. So have you. She outlined the next steps. Arrest warrants would be issued Thursday for all three defendants. Carolyn would be charged with attempted murder in the first degree, financial fraud, identity forgery, and conspiracy. Russell Firth would face conspiracy, financial fraud, and money laundering. Dennis Wakefield's charges would depend on the scope of his cooperation, but at minimum, he faced conspiracy and fraud. Wakefield's attorney called us this morning, Price added. He's prepared to provide a full account of the financial structure, including the origin of the Compass Point Holdings capital and the sequence of the forged documents. In exchange, he's requesting a plea to reduced conspiracy charges. We haven't agreed yet, but his information corroborates everything in your file. I asked one question. What about Dr. Marsh? Price nodded. Doctor. Marsh came forward voluntarily and filed a self-report with the medical board. His cooperation is noted. He'll likely face professional sanctions license suspension, mandatory review, but criminal charges are unlikely given the voluntary disclosure. He's expected to testify. Marcus sat beside me through the entire meeting. He did not speak. He did not need to. His presence was the answer to every silent question I had carried for 7 weeks, whether my son would stand with me when the truth surfaced, whether the distance Carolyn had manufactured could be undone, whether the word family still meant what I believed it meant. Walking out of the courthouse, Marcus and I crossed the parking lot in cold December sunshine. Our breath made small clouds that dissolved before they reached the sky. Dad, he said, thank you for not giving up. I stopped walking. I looked at my son, 29 years old, shoulders squared, eyes steady, standing in a courthouse parking lot on a Wednesday morning because he chose to be there. Giving up was never an option. I said, a captain doesn't abandon the boat because the water gets rough. He reads the current, adjusts the heading, and keeps his hands on the wheel. Marcus smiled. It was the first real smile I had seen from him in months. We drove home together, the harbor glinting silver in the distance. Thursday came the way storms arrive in New England announced, but still startling when they hit. Helen called at 9:12. Warrants are served, all three. Carolyn was arrested at Mitchell Dwyer's office in Boston, where she had been meeting with her attorney. Detective Arnett coordinated with Boston PD. She was processed, photographed, and released on $200,000 bail by early afternoon. Dwyer issued a statement calling the charges exaggerated and promising a vigorous defense. Helen forwarded me the statement. I read it once and deleted it. Dennis Wakefield surrendered voluntarily at the Essex County Courthouse at 10 o'clock, accompanied by his attorney. His bail was set at $75,000. He was out within the hour. Helen said his cooperation agreement was being formalized, full testimony regarding the financial architecture, in exchange for a guilty plea to 1 count of conspiracy, with sentencing recommendations left to the judge. Russell Firth was arrested at his home in Nashua, New Hampshire, at 8:45 in the morning. Unlike the other two, Russell did not go quietly. Arnett told Helen that when officers arrived, Russell attempted to destroy documents in a backyard fire pit. A Nashua officer recovered partially burned records that included handwritten notes outlining the Compass Point Holdings fund structure, a list of Bobby's assets with estimated values, and a draft letter to a Brunswick, Maine real estate agent inquiring about cottage rentals the cottage Carolyn had mentioned in her handwritten note, the Brunswick cottage. I had not thought about it since reading Carolyn's letter on Sunday. Now the detail returned with new weight. You were supposed to sign the papers and move to the cottage in Brunswick. That had been the original plan. Not murder, not warfarin, just a quiet relocation. Ship the old captain to a cottage on the coast, transfer the assets, and let him fade. The poison came later, when I did not cooperate on schedule. Russell's burned notes confirmed the timeline. The cottage inquiry was dated January 2024, 11 months before the first warfarin capsule appeared beside my coffee. I sat in my study and let that settle. 11 months. For 11 months, the plan had been merely theft, take the house, the boat, the savings, and park me somewhere out of sight. When I failed to sign the papers, Margaret Lou kept preparing. When I asked too many questions about the estate planning Carolyn kept suggesting, the strategy shifted. Fraud became insufficient. Control became insufficient. So they escalated to elimination. I understood then that the warfarin was not Carolyn's first choice. It was her last resort. And that understanding did not make it better. It made it worse. Because it meant she had weighed the options, calculated the cost of keeping me alive versus the convenience of letting me die, and chosen the numbers over the man. Friday morning, I did something I hadn't done in weeks. I walked to the harbor alone, without purpose, without a phone call to make or evidence to review. The December air was raw, the water flat and gray, the docks mostly empty. I stood at the end of the pier where the Lucky Penny was moored and looked at her. She was 42 feet of painted steel and oak, built in 1986 by a boatyard in Bath that no longer existed. I bought her in 1994 with money I saved over 11 years of working other men's boats. I named her after a penny Marcus found on the dock the day we signed the papers. He was 3 years old, holding the coin up to me like it was treasure. And I told him it was. Carolyn wanted to sell her for $380,000 to a shell company owned by her brother. A boat that carried my family through 30 years of water, weather, and work reduced to a number on a forged contract. I stepped aboard. The deck was cold under my boots. I went to the wheelhouse and sat in the captain's chair. The leather cracked and shaped to my body after decades of use. Through the windshield, I could see the breakwater, the open Atlantic beyond it, and the pale December sky stretching to the horizon. I had spent 40 years reading the ocean from this chair. I had weathered nor'easters that bent the antenna mast flat. I had pulled traps in fog so thick the bow disappeared. I had motored home in the dark by compass alone when the electronics failed, trusting the numbers and the feel of the current under the hull. But I had never prepared for the storm that came from inside my own house. I sat there for a long time. The boat rocked gently in the harbor swell, a slow rhythm that had comforted me since I was 23 years old. I thought about Carolyn's letter. The first 20 years were real, and I tried to locate those years in my memory. The kitchen in our first apartment on Maplewood Avenue. The night Marcus was born, and she held my hand so hard it bruised. The anniversary when she surprised me with a weekend in Camden, and we danced on a restaurant patio overlooking the harbor while a man played guitar. Were those years real? Or were they simply the years before she found a better use for me? I did not have an answer. I suspected I never would. Some questions are like deep water. You can measure the depth, but you cannot see the bottom. At noon, Marcus appeared on the dock. He stood with his hands in his jacket pockets, looking up at me in the wheelhouse. He did not ask if I was all right. He climbed aboard, sat in the mate's chair beside me, and looked out at the same gray water. We stayed like that for an hour, two men on a boat that was still theirs, watching the tide go out. Christmas Eve arrived with snow. It began around 4 in the afternoon, light flakes at first, drifting sideways across the harbor like confetti from a parade no one had planned. By evening, the rooftops along Rogers Street were white, and the masts in the marina wore thin coats of frost that caught the light from the dockside lamps. Marcus came over at 5. He brought a bag of groceries, 2 steaks, potatoes, a bottle of red wine, and a blueberry pie from the bakery on Main Street. He set everything on the kitchen counter and looked at me. "I figured we'd cook," he said. We cooked. It was the first meal I had prepared in that kitchen, without Carolyn in 35 years. And the absence was physical, a missing shape in the room. A silence where humming used to be. But Marcus filled the space in his own way, moving between the counter and the stove with the easy confidence of a young man who had learned to feed himself. He seasoned the steaks with salt and pepper. I sliced the potatoes. Neither of us mentioned her name. We ate at the dining table. The 3 folders were gone, locked in Helen's office since Saturday, but I could still see their outlines in my mind. Blue, green, red. Evidence of a life dismantled and rebuilt in 7 weeks. After dinner, Marcus washed the dishes while I dried. A small ritual, ordinary and ancient. When we finished, he poured 2 glasses of wine, and we sat in the living room. The Christmas tree was bare. I had not decorated it this year, but Marcus had plugged in the lights, and the white glow filled the room with something that almost resembled peace. "I talked to Mom," he said. I set my glass down. "She called me yesterday. She wanted to explain." He paused. I let her talk. I didn't argue. I didn't forgive. I just listened. What did she say? The same thing she wrote in the letter, that the first 20 years were real, that Russell pushed her into the financial part, that the pills were, he stopped, swallowed. She said the pills were a mistake. A mistake. 48 capsules of warfarin placed beside my coffee every morning for 7 weeks. A dosage calculated to induce a fatal hemorrhagic stroke. A mistake. I did not argue with my son's account. I did not correct the language. Carolyn would use whatever words served her, and Marcus was old enough to hear them without my translation. "How do you feel?" I asked. Marcus looked at the Christmas tree. The lights reflected in his eyes small, steady points, like harbor markers seen from a distance. "I feel like I lost her a long time ago," he said, "and I'm only just finding out now." I nodded. There was nothing to add. Grief does not always arrive at the moment of loss. Sometimes it waits patient and precise until you have enough distance to see what was taken. Christmas morning, I woke early. The snow had stopped overnight, and the harbor was white and still. I made coffee, sat on the porch in my heavy coat, and watched the sun rise behind the breakwater. The light came slowly, turning the snow from blue to gold, and for a few minutes the world was clean. The week between Christmas and New Year passed quietly. Helen filed a motion to freeze all of Carolyn's remaining accounts, pending trial. The judge granted it on December 27th. Wakefield's formal cooperation agreement was signed the same day, full testimony, in exchange for a single conspiracy count, with a recommended sentence of 18 to 24 months. Russell Firth's attorney requested a bail reduction and was denied. Russell remained in Essex County custody. On December 30th, I received a call from an unexpected number. It was Dr. Alan Marsh, Mr. Hale, he said. "I owe you more than a phone call, but I wanted you to know I've completed my voluntary disclosure to the medical board. My license is suspended pending review. I accept that. What I did was wrong, and no explanation changes that. I listened. I also want you to know that I will testify, fully, whatever the DA needs. Thank you, Dr. Marsh, I said. That takes courage. No, he said. What you did took courage. I'm just trying to deserve the second chance. I hung up and stood at the window. The harbor was silver, the boats motionless, the sky heavy with the kind of clouds that promise more snow, but hold it back. Waiting. New Year's Eve. Marcus arrived at 8, with Sal Medeiros and Ed Barros. Sal brought a 6-pack. Ed brought a deck of cards. We sat around the kitchen table and played poker for pennies the way we had done 20 years ago, before age and distance, and the ordinary drift of life had separated us. At 11:45, we put on coats and walked to the harbor. The town had set up a small fireworks display at the end of the breakwater. We stood on the dock beside the Lucky Penny, our breath rising in white clouds, and waited. The first rocket went up at midnight, a single gold trail that split into 100 falling stars over the black water. Marcus stood beside me. Sal clapped my shoulder. Ed raised his bottle. I looked at the boat. Her hull was dark and steady against the dock, her lines taut, her deck dusted with fresh snow. She had survived the storm, as she had survived every storm before it. Not because she was invincible, but because she was built with care, maintained with attention, and captained by someone who refused to let go of the wheel. I thought about what I had learned in 7 weeks. That betrayal does not always come from strangers. That love can be both real and weaponized. That the people who save you are sometimes the ones you least expect. A mechanic who opens a casing, a pharmacist who recognizes a compound, a lawyer who fights without flinching, a son who sits beside you in silence. And I thought about this. A man's life is not measured by the storms he avoids, but by the ones he sails through, and the crew he keeps when the water settles. The fireworks ended. The harbor went dark, then quiet, then still. "Happy New Year, Dad," Marcus said. I put my arm around my son. "Happy New Year," I said. The water held us. The boat held us. The night held everything else. I learned something in those 7 weeks that 40 years on the Atlantic never taught me. The most dangerous storms don't come with warnings. They don't bend antennas or break windows. They sit across from you at breakfast. They kiss your cheek on the way out the door. They hand you a pill and call it love. But I also learned this. You don't have to face them alone. A mechanic who opens the wrong panel at the right time. A pharmacist who holds a capsule to the light instead of looking the other way. A lawyer who doesn't flinch. A son who sits beside you in silence when silence is all you need. If you're listening to this, and something feels wrong in your own house, a signature you didn't authorize, a pill you didn't ask for, a distance that someone else manufactured, trust that instinct. A captain who ignores the current doesn't get a second chance. Pay attention, keep records, and find your crew.